Our first plant for plant list 6 is Achillea coronation gold, and the common name is coronation gold yarrow. So this is in the family of Asteraceae. It has a light preference of full to partial shade and a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils, but it can tolerate those dry soils. The Achille coronation gold has that umbel floral shape, as you can see in the terminals, and it's yellow. It's long lasting, going throughout the growing season. Then it has this dissected fern like foliage that's almost gray. And this also has more of a pubescence to a tomentose texture to the foliage when you touch it as well. And then the flowers and the foliage is also aromatic. So if you want to smell that, it smells very good. Yarrows in general reminds me a lot of if you guys are familiar with growing carrots. So if you guys are familiar with growing carrots, that foliage that you'd see in a carrot, that's what a lot of the yarrows remind me of. So that's just something to note. Next, we have Achillea moonshine, and this is also in the family of Asteraceae. It has a light preference of full to partial shade and a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils, and then it can also tolerate that dry. So both of these have the same exact characteristics of the light preference and soil preference as well. Achillea moonshine is very similar to Achillea coronation gold. The only thing that really differs with this is the flower head is a lot smaller than the coronation gold, and then the flowers in the moonshine, the Chile moonshine, are a lot lighter as well. It has like a lighter yellow, not such a deep yellow, mustard yellow, than you did with the coronation blue. Now, the Achillea millefolium, or the common yarrow or woundwort, is still in the family of Asteraceae. It has a light preference of full to partial shade and a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils, with that tolerance of a dry a little bit there as well. Now, with the common yarrow, this is going to be more of the invasive weeds that we're going to come across and they're very aggressive. So if you see this icon in the top right hand corner, that's how you can note that this is going to be more aggressive, and this is going to come across throughout the presentation as well. The Achillea melliforum has a red and sometimes a white coloration to the floral heads. This is an acorum at the terminals, as you can see in the photo. And this is, again, a long-lasting bloom throughout the growing season, preferably like June through August. Here again, with the foliage of Achillea melliforum, we have deeply dissected fern-like leaves. It's almost grayish. It's still aromatic. And this, I said, it was gray to more of like a green color in the foliage. And just something to note that Achillea melliforum, that melliforum comes from the Latin verbiage of 1,000 leaves, and that's in reference to the foliage. The Achillea melliforum habit it grows through rhizomes and it spreads upright to almost like a mat forming. This is a perennial, as all of the yarrows, and this is, like I said, this is considered an aggressive weed, so it's going to spread very aggressively. You may want to think about different plant species that you plant around this, because this is going to take up a lot of the area and then block out the sunlight for your other plants. And here's just a photo describing and showing you guys how aggressive this weed can be. There are many different kind of cultivars within the Achillea melliforum, and you can see here they're beautiful. So even though that they are aggressive, they may have a place in your garden. You just have to select that area and make sure it's not going to take over the other plants and have the correct maintenance involved here. Next, we have Agopodium podagraria variegatum, and that's bishop's goutweed. This is in the family Apiaceae. It has a light preference of full sun, partial shade, and then full shade as well, and then a soil preference of dry to moist and well drained to wet as well. So this can really go wherever is needed. But again, we have in the right top corner, we have that this is an aggressive weed, so that bishop's goutweed is very aggressive. Now we have white tiny flowers that still appear in like an umbel formed almost at the terminals. This will, if you are familiar with growing dill, it is very similar to the inflorescence that dill has in those umbels. It's also very typical of parsley or carrots as well. The flowers bloom from May to June. But with this plant, we're typically looking at the foliage more of the inflorescence. The foliage is very attractive. It has a light green with creamy white margins. The individual leaflets are about 3 inches long and they're oval and serrated. So something to note, this is a cultivar, so it can revert back to its original form. And if those do revert, so say if the foliage is not variegated as we see in the photo here, and it's more green coloration that's uniform in the leaf, you could just trim that back. And so you could get rid of that, the reverted shoots. This is one of the most popular ground covers, especially if you want a ground cover that will quickly establish a certain area and that will spread. This is very aggressive, so still you want to think about what you're planting around that and how this plant is going to affect the other plants surrounding. And this usually grows about 8 inches tall. Next we have Agastache funiculum, or the common name Anis hyssop, or blue giant hyssop. It's in the family of Lamiaceae, and it has a light preference of full sun. It could tolerate partial shade as well, and then a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils, and it could tolerate dry soils. The flowers on Agastache funiculum is on the terminals, and it's like a terminal spike, has that purple coloration. It blooms during summertime, and it almost has that lavender look to it as well. Now, if you look at each individual one of these flowers, you can see how it has a two-lipped appearance to it. So if you look at it straight on, you see that two-lipped appearance, and the flowers don't have much of a fragrance either. Now, it's really hard to tell from this photo, but if you look and if you have to feel the stems, and when you feel the stems, when you put it between your fingers, you can see that the stems are squared, and these square stems have ovate to broad, dull green leaves that are about 4 inches long, and these leaves have toothed margins as well. Now, the leaves are also aromatic, which is really nice because you could use these for teas or jellies, and it has like an anise scent to it. This is also an opposite leaf arrangement. This is an upright clump-forming perennial, and this is also in the mint family. It grows about 2 to 4 feet tall. Here's a couple of different cultivars that you could purchase if you would like. They have different colorations to the inflorescence, and the leaves are also different as well. Next, we have Adriatum hostoneanum, and that's Adriatum or floss flower. This is in the family Lamiaceae, and that's still the mint family. Has a light preference of full sun to partial sun, and a soil preference of moist, well-drained soils. The flowers on the floss flower are really interesting. You know, they're on the terminals, and they provide a long-lasting bloom, which is really nice. So you're constantly going to have that purple coloration to your garden or your landscape. Another thing with this, it looks a lot like asters. But with this, it's lacking the ray flowers. So only the disc flowers are actually present here. So it can remind you of like a dandelion as well. The leaves have a deep green coloration. They're typically rounded, sometimes cordate at the base, and cordate has that heart-shaped appearance. They're slightly hairy and quilted, and they have that soft green coloration as well. And this is an annual that typically grows about 4 inches to 18 inches tall. Here are some different cultivars that you may choose from. Next, we have Ajuga retans, and this is bugleweed. This is in the family of Lamiaceae, as a light preference of full, partial shade, and full shade, and then a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils. Again, bugleweed is an aggressive weed, so this can take over an area. The flower, typical in the mint family, it's on the terminals as a spike, and they are tiny blue-violet flowers. This appears in mid to late spring, and it appears in the foliage to about 10 inches. So this is a spreading plant, and it has shiny dark green leaves, and it forms almost as a basal rosette that has the tendency to vine or creep. And retans actually has a meaning of creeping in Latin, so that's where that comes from. And this is also a dense, rapidly spreading, mat-forming ground cover. Here are a couple different cultivars within the species. Next, we have Alsia rosea, common name hollyhock, and it's in the family of Malvaceae. This has a light preference of full sun. It can tolerate partial shade, and a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils, and it can tolerate dry soils as well. Now, the flowers in Alsia rosea, they grow on some kind of like towering spikes or spires, and this has a long bloom period, and it goes from June all the way to August. So even as these flowers stop blooming, you can pick them or cut them, and they will flower again. These flowers can range from 4 to 5 inches in diameter, and these are also single flowers, and it goes from reds, pinks, whites, and also light yellows. The rosea in the name means pink. The foliage of Alsia rosea features large heart-shaped leaves that can be 3, 5, or 7 lobed. And they have rough lower leaves, which they become smaller towards the top. So we have larger leaves on the bottom, and they become smaller towards the top of it. And this is also an alternate leaf arrangement. And the habit of Alsia rosea has a height of 5 to 8 feet tall. Next, we have Ultramilla mollis, and this is lady's mantle. It's in the family of Rosaceae and has a light preference of full shade and partial shade, and a soil preference of moist, well-drained soils. This, again, for a lady's mantle, is an aggressive weed. The flowers on Ultramilla mollis are yellow to green, almost whitish, and they appear on the terminals in corymbs or umbels. And these bloom in late spring to early summer. The foliage in Ultramilla mollis, you can see that it's tomentose, so it's going to be very woolly to touch, and it's going to have that accumulation of water, which is very unique for this species. With this foliage as well, it is a basal formation at the bottom, and it's about 6 to 12 inches tall. It's very long stalked. It has circular to scallop edged and toothed edges, and this is light green in color. This also has 9 to 11 shallow rounded lobes. The habit consists of a clumping perennial that typically reaches about 12 inches in height. Next, we have Anemone X hybrida, and the common name is Japanese anemone. The family that it's in is Ranunculaceae. It has a light preference of partial shade to full shade and a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils. The flowers in Anemone hybrida are on the terminal shoots, and they have single flowers. The single flowers are 2 to 3 inches in diameter, and they have 6 to 9 overlapping white petiole sepals. And then they have the yellow center stamens appear very long as well. And they bloom through August to September. So this is really nice because a lot of these plants that we've been talking about, they have a bloom period in early spring or mid-spring, late spring to August. Here, it's from August to September, so we have more of the fall bloom that we need in our landscape as well. The foliage and anemone hybrida have like a wiry but graceful branching stems, and they have trifoliate dark green leaves as well. This typically grows about 3 to 4 feet tall, and it spreads by creeping rhizomes. Next, we have Aquilegia mecana hybrid, common name columbine. And it's in the family Ranunculaceae, has a light preference of full sun to partial sun, and a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils. So the mecana hybrid group in general are tall columbine hybrid seed strain that features a wide selection of very large and bright colored flowers. These are long spurred, as you can see in that photo here, and they're nodding. They have like a bicolored shades in the flowers, and it can be blue and white or red and white, as you can see here, or red and yellow. That combination, there's various different forms to this, which is really awesome, especially when you're trying to have those exact colors for your client. And this also blooms in springtime. Now, something else to note, the petals have like a backwards extending spur. It's not frontward. So this is also different from the front part of the petal as well. As you can see, here's red in the front part. It's more of like a white coloration. Now, the foliage, and you can see some white coloration in the foliage right now. That's actually leaf minor damage. So that's going back to the fact of knowing what is normal for the plant species and what is not normal. So you can see all of the other colors, how it's that nice light green. That's how it's supposed to look. It's not supposed to have that white tunnel looking issues that are occurring on the other leaves in here. So the leaves are like a trinate leaf arrangement because it has 3 separated forms. It's very deeply lobed as well, and it has that light green color to it. They may also resemble a fern. It's very fern-like. It has that green-gray foliage, and it is also clump forming. Here's a nice photo of it in its natural form in a landscape, but here it's like that clump forming that we explained earlier, and it grows up to 30 inches tall. Next, we have Arabis coscacia, and that's rockcress. And it's in the family of Brassicaceae. Has a light preference of full sun to partial sun, and a soil preference of dry to moist, well-drained soils. It features loose spreading rosettes, and these rosettes are toothed and ovate. They are gray to greenish color, and they're about 2 inches long. The flowers have 4 petals. Each are about a ½ inch long. The white flowers are about ½ inch long, and this blooms in spring. And this is a mat forming evergreen perennial in the mustard family that typically grows about 8 to 10 inches tall and spreads about 20 inches wide or more. Next, we have Armeria maritima, and this is common sea thrift. And it's in the family of Plumaginaceae. And this has a light preference of full sun and a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils, and it can also tolerate dry soils. The flowers have tiny to pink to white flowers, and this blooms in mid-spring. And these are borne on the terminals as well. These are about 1 inch wide, and they have sporadic flowering. So with this, you can cut it back, and the flowers are going to come back even after the bloom is done. The plant forms a dense mounded and stiff linear grass blades, and it's very grass-like and has dark green leaves. Here's the natural habit of Armeria maritima. And with this, it has a very low growing plant. It only grows to about 4 inches tall, and it spreads slowly to 8 to 12 inches. Next, we have Artemisia schmidtiana, or silver mound. This is silver mound Artemisia. It's in the family of Asteraceae. Has a light preference of full sun, can tolerate partial shade, and a soil preference of dry soil, but can also tolerate that moist to well-drained soils as well. The foliage has a alternate leaf arrangement. It's silvery green, has tomentose for the texture foliage, and this arises from short stems. These are twice palmate divided into these linear segments, and this is very fine textured foliage. In the fall, it still remains as like a silvery coloration until quickly it dies back to the crown when frost occurs. The flower has like a silvery bud and then a yellow-white flower, and this is very small. Sometimes it's sparse to non-existent, and it may be unnoticed whatsoever, and this is ornamentally insignificant. Mainly this, we plant this plant from its foliage because of its foliage. The habit is a small herbaceous perennial, matures about 1 foot tall to 1.5 feet wide, and this is a spreading mound growth habit. Next, we have Asarum europaeum, or European wild ginger. It's in the family of Aristolochalaceae. It has a light preference of full shade and a soil preference of moist to well-drained soils. The emerging leaves are extremely pubescent, but this is primarily grown for its glossy, leathery, heart-shaped, kidney-shaped, dark green leaves. These leaves are about 3 inches across, and they remain evergreen in winter. And these also have tiny bell-shaped, they're like greenish yellow flowers that are about 1/2 inch wide, and these bloom in late spring to early summer. This is a creeping ground cover, and it typically grows about 4 inches tall and slowly spreads to about 15 inches wide or more, and this thrives in very shady areas. Next, we have Asclepias tuberosa, or a butterfly weed. This is in the family of Asclepiaceae. So it has a light preference of full sun to partial shade and a soil preference of dry soils, but it could tolerate moist to well-drained soils as well. And it could tolerate the shady areas too. The flowers of butterfly weed appear in clusters or an umbel on the terminals. This inflorescence is a bright orange to yellow orange flowers, and these flowers give prominent spindle-shaped seed pods as well that are about 3 to 6 inches long, as these will appear in later summer going into fall. These split open when ripe, and that releases the silky tailed seeds that are dispersed by wind. They have like a cotton-like cover to the seeds that's going to be dispersed through the wind. This has a pretty long bloom going from late spring throughout summer. And the flowers are a great source of many butterflies, and the leaves, really anything in the milkweed family, the leaves are going to be an excellent source for monarch butterfly larvae in the caterpillar stage and to continue their life cycle. The foliage has a almost reclining, hairy like stems with very narrow lance-shaped leaves. And many species within milkweed have a very milky sap whenever you break the stem. This does not have that milky sap. And this is a perennial that typically grows in a clump and grows up to 1 to 3 feet tall. Next, we have Asclepias incarnata, which is swamp milkweed. And it's in the family of Asclepiaceae. It has a light preference of full to partial shade and a soil preference of that wet, drained soil. Very wet. They like a lot of wet moisture, and they also can tolerate the moist, well-drained soils, but cannot tolerate dry soils. This has a small umbel-shaped inflorescence that is very pink and appears on the terminals. They are fragrant, and they're about 1/4 inch wide. each with 5 petals on the crown. And they appear in those tight clusters, just like we saw with the butterfly weed. And this appears in summer or at the end of the summer. The leaves are very narrow and they are land-shaped. They taper and they are pointed. They're about 3 to 6 inches long. And these, again, are very attractive, the flowers. And the flowers are very attractive to butterflies. The flowers attract a lot of butterflies, as I should say. And the foliage is an excellent source for that monarch caterpillar to come on and continue its life cycle. Swamp milkweed also produces a very attractive fruit, and this also splits open on one side and then releases that silky haired seed that is carried by wind. The habit of swamp milkweed is erect, clump forming, and typically grows about 3 to 4 inches tall and has a branching stems, and this does exude a toxic milky sap when cut. Last but not least, we have Aster novae belgii, or New York aster, and that's in the family of Asteraceae. Has a light preference of full sun, but it could tolerate partial shade. Soil preference of moist to well-drained soils, and it can tolerate dry. The flowers are small daisy-like flowers with purple rays and yellow centers. And this blooms throughout late summer to early fall, and this attracts a lot of butterflies. And the New York aster has about 15 to 25 ray flowers. And this is still very similar to New England asters, which will commonly grow, on streetways or any areas that have been cleared. You're going to see a lot of those New England asters come up, especially in fall time or those fall months. And the New England asters are very aggressively spreading, and they have 40 to 50 rays. This only has 15 to 25 rays, and they're less aggressive. Now, to identify the difference between New York and the New England aster is New York asters, they do not clasp on the stem. So you can see it's not clasping. On the New England asters, however, it clasps fully around the stem. As you can see, the stem is in the middle, and the leaves almost fully go around the stem, almost making a connection on the other side, but it still does leave a little arrow. It's almost coordinate. If you look at the ends, it has that heart-shaped appearance. But the New England does clasp, while the New York asters do not clasp to the stem.